You believe you know what evil looks like. It wears a face you do not recognize, speaks in a voice you would never trust, and acts in ways you would never dare. Evil is distant, it is ugly, it is someone else. That belief is comforting. It protects you from examining what lies underneath your own behavior. But what if that comfort is built on a lie? Not a grand conspiracy, not a story someone forced on you, but a subtle illusion you accepted because it made life easier. You have been taught that to be good is to reject darkness, that evil is something only others fall into. You were never told that the same instincts you blame in others are alive and well inside you. When you withhold part of the truth to avoid confrontation, when you exaggerate a story to win approval, when you speak kindly to someone you secretly despise, you are not being evil, but you are not being innocent either. You are using the very tools that define dark psychology. You are manipulating reality to protect your identity, your position, or your emotional safety. These actions are not rare, they are daily, they are normalized. You do not think of them as manipulation because they do not feel malicious. They feel necessary, they feel human, and they are. The discomfort begins when you realize that the same behaviors you judge in others are often the same ones you use in silence. You might think that darkness is reserved for sociopaths or criminals, that it begins where empathy ends, but psychology does not support that idea. Studies on moral behavior show that people often do what is best for themselves, even when they believe they are acting out of fairness or compassion. The line between self-preservation and moral choice is thinner than you want to believe. Carl Jung described the shadow as the part of the psyche you reject, the aspects of yourself you do not want to see. These are the urges, the thoughts, the reactions you disown. But disowning them does not remove them. It only blinds you to when they take over. Denial does not make you good. It only makes you unaware. This is not about labeling yourself or others. It is about understanding. If dark psychology is the use of psychological tactics to influence, control, or deceive, then it is not exclusive to people with malicious intent. It is available to everyone. It is used by everyone. And it is effective because it is rooted in basic survival. Influence is power. Control is protection. Deception is adaptation. The more you insist that darkness lives only in the cruel, the broken, or the evil, the more vulnerable you become to using it without seeing it. You will justify it. You will call it strategy, leadership, charm, or persuasion. You will frame it as necessary, as if necessity excuses intention. And if you believe that only evil people use manipulation, what does it mean when you catch yourself using it? You do not confess. You rationalize. You turn away from the discomfort of recognizing your own reflection. That refusal to look is where the real danger begins. There is a reason why most people cannot clearly define what evil actually is. They associate it with emotion, with fear, with horror, but not with themselves. The truth is, evil rarely appears in a form you recognize. It often wears the face of reason. It can speak calmly. It can justify itself with logic and good intentions. That is what makes it powerful. That is what makes it real. If dark psychology is human, and you are human, then what separates you from what you claim to reject? The answer is not in your feelings. It is not in your self-image. It is in your awareness. Most people use psychological manipulation without even realizing it, because they do not believe they are capable of it. So the question becomes personal. If you benefit from manipulation, if you know how to control others to protect yourself, and if you have done it without guilt, what does that say about the morality you defend? If the tools of darkness feel so familiar, so useful, so ordinary, then what exactly is it that makes them dark in the first place? And if the story you have always believed about morality was never really yours, whose was it? Stay aware, because we are about to confront the story you were told about being good, and what it was designed to hide. Now you have to decide, not just what you believe, but whether you can stand to look closer at how much of that belief is borrowed. If you are willing to see yourself without excuses, stay with me. And if even a single part of this already hit too close, write it down in the comments. Say what you saw. Someone else might be carrying the same silence. From a young age, you were taught to be good, not to understand goodness, not to question it, but to perform it. You learned how to smile when you were upset, how to say thank you even when you were angry, how to appear kind even when your thoughts were not. You learned to wear a mask. It was rewarded. It was expected. It became automatic. That mask is not a lie. It is a tool. It keeps society running. It avoids conflict. It protects reputation. But it also hides intent. And when intent is hidden, morality becomes a performance, not an internal compass, but an external display. You were praised for your politeness, not your honesty. You were encouraged to forgive quickly, not because you felt peace, but because resentment was labeled as ugly. You were warned not to speak certain truths, not because they were false, but because they would make people uncomfortable. Morality, in this form, is not about what is right. It is about what is accepted. This is where human behavior becomes difficult to trust. People often act morally, not because they are good, but because they fear consequences. They fear social rejection, personal guilt, or a damaged identity. They act out of self-preservation, not principle. And in that moment, the boundary between moral choices and calculated behavior fades. Sigmund Freud's model of the psyche, separating the id, ego, and superego, shows how deeply this tension runs. The id demands pleasure and instinct. The superego imposes morality, often inherited from culture and authority. The ego negotiates between them, choosing actions that maintain balance. This constant internal struggle means that even your most virtuous decisions might be shaped more by pressure than by principle. Carl Jung expanded this further with the idea of the shadow self. He believed that the parts of yourself you label as unacceptable are pushed into the unconscious. You hide your envy, your rage, your desire to dominate or control. You deny their existence, but denial does not erase them. It only buries them where they operate without your knowledge. This unconscious moral split creates a false identity, one that appears ethical while being silently driven by darker motives. In modern society, this split is encouraged. Social media allows you to curate a version of yourself that looks kind, thoughtful, and wise. But that image is not who you are. It is who you want to be seen as. And the longer you maintain that mask, the more disconnected you become from the truth beneath it. The paradox is simple. The more invested you are in appearing moral, the less willing you become to admit when you are not. And the less you admit, the more often you act from your shadow without realizing it. The most dangerous people are not always the ones who embrace their darkness. Sometimes they are the ones who are convinced they have none. Psychological manipulation does not always come from malice. Sometimes it comes from self-deception. When you believe your actions are pure, even when they harm others, you protect your ego. You rewrite your own intentions. You create a narrative that maintains your self-image. That narrative can become more important than truth. Consider a common situation. You give someone advice, not because they asked, but because you want them to see you as wise. You offer help, not because it is needed, but because it puts you in control. You apologize, not out of regret, but to end an uncomfortable conversation. These are not evil actions, but they are not morally clean either. They are calculated, emotional strategies used to navigate relationships. This is not about guilt, it is about recognition. If you cannot admit that your behavior is sometimes strategic, you cannot change it. And if you cannot see where morality ends and manipulation begins, you will continue to use both, blindly believing they are the same. But behind every moral performance is a pattern you did not choose, a script written by something older than you. To see the truth, you must ask who taught you to be good and why they needed to. The idea of being good has always been attached to obedience, to approval, to how others see you. But if your goodness is shaped by fear and habit, is it really yours? If this reflection opens something in you, subscribe, not to follow, but to remember what you just saw, and share it with one person who has worn the same mask too long. There is a reason why darkness does not feel foreign. It is because it never was. What you call dark psychology, what you label as toxic or manipulative, is not a mutation of human behavior. It is its origin. The mind did not evolve to be moral, it evolved to survive. Every human being is born with needs, instincts, and fears. Before morality, before law, before language, there was hunger, threat, pain, and competition. The first rules were not about fairness, they were about control. When you look closely at what drives your choices today, you will find traces of those same instincts hidden beneath the surface. Sigmund Freud believed that the human psyche was driven by conflict. The id demands pleasure. It wants satisfaction. It is primitive, impulsive, and unapologetic. The superego, shaped by culture and authority, pushes moral expectations. It is strict, critical, often unrealistic, and between them stands the ego, trying to make peace, trying to balance instinct with image. You do not escape this conflict, you live in it. And when the pressure rises, you compromise. Compromise, however, is not always honest. When your instincts push too hard, your mind finds another way. It begins to twist the story. That is where defense mechanisms come in. Rationalization, projection, repression. You do not face the darkness, you redirect it, you rewrite it, and you keep functioning without ever admitting what you have done. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow makes this even more personal. According to him, the parts of yourself that you are ashamed of, the parts that do not fit your idea of who you are, do not disappear. They fall into the unconscious, and from there they influence everything: your preferences, your fears, your relationships, your responses. You do not see the shadow, but you live through it. This hidden self is not only shaped by trauma or culture, it is shaped by biology. In evolutionary psychology, the theory of the selfish gene explains how behavior that appears cooperative often has hidden layers of self-interest. You might help others, but it is often because helping them helps you. Social bonding creates safety. Kindness creates alliances. Empathy can be a tool for influence, not just connection. You see this in children. A toddler will hit another to take a toy. No guilt, just instinct. If corrected, they may cry, not because they feel remorse, but because they are caught. The emotion they feel is not about morality, it is about consequence. That process never fully goes away. As adults, you may not take toys, but you learn how to take status, attention, influence. You learn to do it with a smile. Dark psychology is not about causing harm. It is about using the mind's tools to get what you want, often without showing your hand. It is strategic. Sometimes it is cold, sometimes it is automatic, but it is always human. Even morality itself can be used as a weapon. People use moral outrage to gain power, to shame others, to signal loyalty. History shows that some of the most horrifying acts were committed not in the name of evil, but in the name of good. The Inquisition, the cultural purges, political revolutions, they were carried out by people convinced they were doing what was right. That is the terrifying part. Evil rarely knows it is evil. It believes it is justified. This is the danger of ignorance. If you do not understand the origin of your own behavior, you will call it natural. You will justify it. You will repeat it. And you will not stop. So ask yourself, when you feel the urge to manipulate, to control, to deceive, what are you protecting? Your comfort, your power, your image. And more importantly, when you watch others do the same, do you judge them for it, or do you recognize the instinct in yourself? If the root of human nature is self-preservation, then are you ever truly moral, or are you just negotiating with your own fear? Write in the comments, what part of yourself have you been avoiding because it did not fit the story you were told? And if you felt it stir while listening, do not run from it. Stay, there is more you need to see. And if this woke something quiet inside you, subscribe, not to follow, but to keep it alive. The mask is cracking, the structure underneath is even older. You think manipulation is rare. You think it is something you can easily recognize, resist, or avoid. But the truth is, you live inside it. Every day you see it, you respond to it, and you often use it, without ever labeling it for what it is. You wake up and check your messages. You delay your reply to create tension. You post a filtered image and wait for validation. You enter a conversation already knowing what you want the other person to feel. You apologize without meaning it, just to end the discomfort. You praise someone so they will agree with you later. These are not crimes, they are daily habits, and they are built on the same principles that define dark psychology. Manipulation does not always begin with evil intent. It begins with fear. Fear of rejection, fear of losing control, fear of being misunderstood. So instead of asking for what you need, you imply it. Instead of showing vulnerability, you craft a position of strength. You nudge. You frame, you suggest, and the other person responds, believing it was their choice. Human behavior adapts to social survival. In relationships, you learn to adjust your tone to avoid conflict. In the workplace, you mirror power to build trust. In family dynamics, you guilt others to maintain influence. You do not call this manipulation because it feels normal, but that is exactly why it works. It hides inside the expected. The psychology behind this is clear. Social conditioning shapes your behavior from childhood. When you act in a way that pleases others, you are rewarded. When you challenge authority, you are punished. Over time, you learn which behaviors increase approval, attention, or control. This becomes unconscious. You begin to believe it is your personality, but much of it is strategy. Research on emotional intelligence shows that people with high social awareness often use their skills to influence others, sometimes in subtle, even unconscious ways. They know when to pause, when to flatter, when to withdraw. These are not necessarily malicious actions, but they are calculated, and they have consequences. The difference between persuasion and manipulation lies in intent, but intent is not always visible. You might believe you are helping someone see the truth, when in reality, you are only guiding them toward your benefit. You might believe you are protecting someone, when in truth, you are just avoiding the discomfort of their reaction. You might even convince yourself that silence is kindness, when it is really avoidance. This ambiguity is what makes dark psychology so effective. It operates in gray areas. It blends morality with instinct. It uses trust as a pathway, not a goal. And when you participate in it long enough, it becomes difficult to distinguish honesty from strategy. In romantic relationships, one partner might withhold affection to gain control. In parenting, guilt might be used to shape behavior. In friendships, secrets might be exchanged as currency. These dynamics do not feel like manipulation. They feel like connection. But the cost of that connection is often clarity. If you are always adjusting to get what you want, even subtly, even with good reasons, are you ever truly being yourself? Or have you turned yourself into a tool to manage others? You have likely been manipulated by people you trusted. You have likely manipulated people you cared about, not out of cruelty, out of habit, out of protection, out of fear. But if that behavior becomes invisible to you, it becomes automatic. And once it is automatic, it becomes dangerous. You are not being asked to feel guilty. You are being asked to notice. Because without noticing, you cannot choose. And without choice, you are not in control of your own behavior. You are just responding to what once worked, even if it no longer serves you. Think about your last conversation. How much of what you said was designed to get a response, to shape an emotion, to steer the moment? Write down one thing you noticed in yourself while listening. Put it in the comments, even if it is small, especially if it is small. And if you know someone who is caught in a cycle of these invisible games, share this with them. Let them see that it is not weakness to question your own tactics. It is the beginning of strength. You are surrounded by mirrors, but not all of them show your face. Some reflect only the patterns you refuse to see. One of them is about to reveal how these same tools are used for something you never expected. Keep watching. What comes next might not feel dark at all, and that is exactly why it works. The moment you hear the term dark psychology, you assume danger. You think of abuse, lies, manipulation, destruction. But what if the darkness itself is neutral? What if the danger is not in the tool, but in the one who holds it? Every psychological mechanism used to manipulate can also be used to protect. Every behavior labeled as toxic can also be used to survive. Influence, control, emotional leverage. None of these are inherently wrong. They are strategies. The question is not whether they are dark. The question is whether they are conscious. You use psychological influence when you set boundaries. You use it when you de-escalate a threat with silence instead of confrontation. You use it when you choose your words carefully to diffuse conflict, to keep someone from breaking. These are not lies. These are decisions, and they are often decisions that save people, including yourself. Philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli was never interested in whether power was clean. He asked whether it was effective. In his view, virtue was valuable only if it served survival. If it put you in danger, it was not virtue, it was naivety. This is not cruelty, it is realism. Morality that ignores consequence is not morality, it is performance. Dark psychology becomes dangerous when it is denied, but when it is understood, it becomes clarity. It becomes a method of moving through a world filled with conflict, deception, and instability. Refusing to understand it does not protect you, it only blinds you to how often it is used against you. Leaders use dark psychology when they build loyalty by creating emotional bonds, when they mirror their followers' desires to maintain influence. Parents use it when they create consequences that shape behavior, when they simplify complex truths to maintain authority. Therapists, in many cases, use it when they ask questions that bypass defenses, not to manipulate, but to guide someone to awareness. These examples are not ethical shortcuts, they are ethical tools. The same mechanism that manipulates can be used to protect someone from themselves. The same cognitive bias that can be exploited to sell a product can also be used to break someone's destructive belief about their worth. Even the military, in psychological operations, studies influence and persuasion not to destroy, but to maintain order, to avoid violence, to preserve structure. The presence of darkness is not the problem. The absence of understanding is. What people call good or bad is often determined by result, not process. A lie that saves a life is often forgiven. A truth that causes collapse is often blamed. This reveals how fragile your moral framework actually is. It is flexible, it shifts under pressure, and in that flexibility lies the truth about human nature. People are not built to be consistent, they are built to survive. And survival at times requires using tactics that do not align with the story you tell yourself. That does not make you a villain, it makes you aware. There is a deeper paradox here. If you reject the tools of dark psychology completely, you remain vulnerable to those who do not. But if you use those tools without reflection, you become the very thing you once feared. So where is the balance? The answer is not in extremes, it is in awareness. Awareness does not make you manipulative, it makes you responsible. It gives you the choice to act, not out of instinct, but out of intention. And intention, when grounded in clarity, becomes the difference between harm and strength. Dark psychology is human, but using it with intention is what makes it ethical. If you understand that influence is real, that emotions shape thought, that people can be guided without force, then you are no longer just reacting, you are choosing. Think about the last time you held back your truth to protect someone, or the moment you said something in just the right way, not to lie, but to get through. Was it manipulation, or was it strategy? And if it was both, what does that say about your own morality? Write it down in the comments. Let others see how this question lives in them too. And if this recognition challenged your instinct to see darkness as something to avoid, subscribe, not to consume, but to witness more clearly. Because next we are stepping into something even more uncomfortable. Not how you use darkness, but how you fear it in others, especially when it looks too much like you. It is easier to call something evil than to understand it. Understanding takes effort. It requires slowing down your instinct to judge, suspending your emotional response, and asking why something exists before deciding what it means. Most people do not do this. Most people are trained to react. When you see manipulation, deceit, or control in someone else, you are quick to label it. You call it toxic, you call it evil, you distance yourself from it. You believe that judgment protects you, but often what it actually protects is your illusion of moral superiority. You do not hate what is evil, you hate what reminds you of your own capacity for it. This is psychological projection. When you reject a part of yourself that you are unwilling to face, you begin to see it more vividly in others. You spot manipulation quickly because you know how to use it. You are disgusted by control because you crave it. You accuse others of being cold, calculating, or dangerous. But what you are really doing is pushing your own shadow away. Carl Jung warned that what you resist in yourself will dominate your perception of the world. And when the world begins to reflect that darkness back at you, your fear grows stronger. Not because the threat is real, but because it is familiar. Societies do the same thing. Cultures demonize what they do not understand. When a behavior challenges the dominant belief system, it is labeled immoral. When a group expresses unfamiliar values, it is seen as dangerous. This is not based on evidence, it is based on psychological discomfort. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, while covering the trial of Adolf Eichmann, introduced the term the banality of evil. She observed that monstrous acts are often carried out by ordinary people who are simply following orders, conforming to structure, or preserving their status. Evil, she argued, is not always rooted in hatred. Sometimes it is rooted in thoughtlessness. This unsettled many people. They wanted evil to look like madness, like cruelty, like horror. They did not want to believe that it could look like paperwork, uniforms, or obedience. But it can, and it often does. Most acts of harm are not committed by people who think they are wrong. They are committed by people who believe they are right. This is what makes dark psychology so dangerous when left unchecked. It is not fueled by monstrous intent. It is fueled by moral certainty. Moral certainty closes the mind. It leaves no room for doubt, no room for examination. It creates a binary where none exists. You are either good or evil. You are either a victim or a predator. But reality does not work that way. Behavior is complex, motivation is layered, and judgment, when made too quickly, obscures the truth. Cognitive dissonance plays a role here. When your actions do not match your values, you either change your behavior or change your beliefs. Most people choose the second. They adjust their story, they rationalize, they invent reasons that preserve their image of themselves. And when someone else's behavior threatens that image, they respond not with curiosity, but with condemnation. That condemnation feels like clarity, but it is often fear. Fear of becoming what you judge. Fear of discovering that you already have. The line between victim and manipulator is not fixed. In one situation, you may be exploited. In another, you may be the one doing the exploiting. The roles shift, the context changes, and if you are not willing to examine that shift, you become trapped in a false narrative, one where you are always the one being wronged. But ask yourself, if every person who uses psychological influence is evil, what does that say about you? And if every act of persuasion is manipulation, then how do you communicate without it? The darker truth is not that evil exists. It is that it wears familiar faces. It speaks in ways you understand, and sometimes it believes it is saving the world. Understanding this does not mean excusing harm. It means recognizing the human architecture behind it. It means dismantling the illusion that darkness belongs only to others. And it means confronting the possibility that your strongest judgment may be a mirror you have been too afraid to look into. Not all fear points outward, some of it leads inward, and that is where you are heading next, toward the question no one wants to ask, but everyone quietly lives with. What happens when the shadow looks back? There comes a moment when judgment fades, when theory collapses, and you are left with nothing to analyze but yourself. Not the version you show others, not the story you tell in your mind, but the raw, unfiltered truth that emerges when no one is watching. This is the mirror, and most people avoid it. You are taught to build an identity. You form beliefs about who you are, what you stand for, what you reject, what you would never do. That identity becomes your armor, but it is also a filter. It protects your self-image, even when it distorts reality. You remember moments when you felt ashamed, when you said something cruel, when you ignored someone's pain, when you manipulated the outcome of a situation in your favor. You buried those moments, convinced yourself they were out of character. You moved on, but they are still there, and they never stopped shaping you. The unconscious mind does not forget what the conscious mind tries to erase. It stores everything: your suppressed guilt, your unspoken desires, your denied aggression. These elements do not disappear. They operate beneath the surface, influencing your reactions, your habits, your relationships. When you look into the mirror of dark psychology, you do not see a villain. You see a person who has been trying to survive. Someone who has learned to adapt, to defend, to assert control when threatened. Someone who has used emotional intelligence, not only for connection, but also for influence. That influence becomes complex when you realize how often it works. You charm someone to get what you want. You use silence as pressure. You manipulate a conversation without ever raising your voice. These actions feel small, but over time, they shape how others experience you, and more importantly, they shape how you experience yourself. If you are willing to ask hard questions, start here. When was the last time you used guilt to get your way? When was the last time you exaggerated vulnerability to gain sympathy? When did you pretend to agree with someone only to avoid their discomfort? These are not extreme acts. They are common. They are human. But if you do not recognize them, you cannot change them. Facing the mirror is not about self-punishment. It is about awareness. You are not being asked to condemn yourself. You are being asked to stop lying to yourself. The most dangerous form of manipulation is the one you perform on your own perception. When you convince yourself that your actions are always justified, you remove the possibility of growth. This is not a moral crisis, it is a psychological one, because the closer you look, the more you see that your behavior is not fixed. You are capable of kindness and cruelty, empathy and indifference, generosity and control. These contradictions are not flaws, they are your nature. And pretending they do not exist does not make you good, it makes you blind. This is where the concept of the shadow becomes unavoidable. According to Carl Jung, the integration of the shadow is essential to becoming a whole person. Denying your darkness makes you incomplete, accepting it makes you conscious, and consciousness, not purity, is the path to freedom. If your entire life has been a struggle to prove your goodness, to avoid being seen as flawed or dangerous or wrong, then the mirror is not your enemy, it is your opportunity. Because once you stop hiding from your own behavior, you begin to choose it with clarity. You are no longer ruled by instinct. You are no longer driven by fear. You are no longer performing. What do you see in yourself that you have never said out loud? What part of your mind do you protect behind justifications, behind tone, behind silence? And more importantly, who would you become if you stopped pretending? You are not being asked to become someone new. You are being asked to look at what you already are and take responsibility for it. Most people turn away. They return to their roles, their patterns, their masks. But you are not most people. Not anymore. You are already looking, and the mirror is not going anywhere. The more you understand dark psychology, the more clearly you begin to see how much of your life has been shaped by it. Not just in others, but in yourself. That clarity can be disturbing. It can make you question your values, your decisions, your sense of control. But that disturbance is not danger, it is growth. You were taught that to be good is to avoid darkness, that the less you know about manipulation, the more innocent you are. That idea is not only false, it is harmful. Ignorance is not purity, it is blindness. And blindness is not safety, it is vulnerability. People fear knowledge of the dark side of human nature because they associate it with corruption. They worry that if they understand manipulation, they will use it. That if they recognize their own ability to control, they will become heartless. But the opposite is true. Awareness is what separates responsibility from instinct. The tools of dark psychology, persuasion, emotional leverage, strategic behavior are not destructive on their own. What makes them destructive is unconscious use. When you manipulate someone and refuse to admit it, you are lying to yourself. When you influence others to gain power and pretend it is selflessness, you are hiding. And when you avoid the reality of your own behavior to preserve your moral image, you are not protecting others, you are protecting your ego. You cannot choose what you do not understand. If you are unaware of your behavior, then you are not in control of it. You are repeating patterns. You are defending instincts. You are responding to fear, not exercising freedom. Understanding the dark side of the mind gives you a different kind of power, the power to act deliberately. This kind of self-awareness is not common. Most people live in reaction. They mirror what they see. They justify what they feel. They avoid what unsettles them. They live in what philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called the herd morality, a system of values created not by personal reflection, but by collective fear. What is called good is often what is accepted. What is called evil is often what is misunderstood. But when you step outside of that herd, you begin to build your own values. You stop asking, what will they think of me? And start asking, what am I really doing and why? You stop performing, you start choosing. This is not freedom without cost. When you stop blaming the world for your behavior, when you stop pretending you are only a product of your environment, you lose your excuses. you take responsibility for the full range of your behavior, including the parts you once tried to hide. This level of self-examination is rare, it is uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because until you know why you do what you do, you will continue to repeat it, no matter how many times you try to change. You may notice that the more aware you become, the less reactive you feel. You pause before speaking. You observe your intention before acting. You recognize when you are trying to influence others, and you ask yourself if that influence is honest. That is not weakness. That is mastery. Mastery does not mean you are perfect. It means you are awake. The world does not need more innocence. It needs more awareness. Not knowledge that feeds superiority, but knowledge that leads to responsibility. To see your own darkness clearly, without flinching, is to gain the ability to prevent it from controlling you. Most people never get this far. They stop at discomfort. They return to certainty. They protect their identity. But you did not stop. You followed the discomfort. You allowed it to speak. And now you are here. You do not need permission to understand yourself. You do not need to ask whether your thoughts are acceptable. What you need is honesty. Quiet, serious honesty. So look inward now. Ask yourself what you know about your own patterns that you have never said out loud. If you are ready to take that step, write it down. Let it leave your mind and enter the world. You may not be proud of it, but you will be free of hiding it. Because the goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become whole. You have seen what most people spend their lives avoiding. Not the dramatic images of cruelty or the easy villains from stories, but the quieter truth. Dark psychology is not reserved for criminals, tyrants, or sociopaths. It is part of ordinary human nature. It lives in relationships, in conversations, in habits, in instincts, and most of all, it lives in silence. You are not being asked to judge yourself. You are being asked to see yourself clearly, without distortion, without performance, without hiding behind what you think you are supposed to be. That is a different kind of challenge, one that most people never take. Throughout this entire path, you may have felt discomfort, moments where something landed too close, moments where you saw your past decisions in a new light. That discomfort is not something to push away. It is proof that you were paying attention. Understanding the dark side of human nature is not about becoming darker. It is about becoming honest. You cannot control what you refuse to admit. You cannot grow if you protect your image more than your truth. And you cannot live freely if every choice you make is filtered through denial. You have seen how morality becomes a performance. You have seen how manipulation blends into kindness. You have seen how power often wears the face of virtue. And you have seen how even your best intentions can be tied to your need for control, security, or approval. This does not make you evil. It makes you human. But humanity is not just about instincts. It is also about choice. The difference between those who destroy and those who protect is not in what they feel, it is in what they do with it. It is in what they are willing to see and what they are willing to admit. So now the choice is in your hands. You can return to the role you were trained to play. You can dismiss what you heard, rationalize it, bury it, and go back to your automatic patterns. Or you can keep asking the harder questions, the kind that do not give easy answers, the kind that force you to grow. No one is coming to save you from yourself. No teacher, no philosophy, no moral rule book can tell you what to do with what you now know. The only guide you have is your awareness, and it will only serve you if you listen. If this journey opened something in you, then do not let it close again. Write in the comments one truth you now see more clearly than before. Not for approval, not for performance, but for liberation. Something real, something that deserves to exist outside your mind. And if you know someone who is lost inside the performance of goodness, someone who keeps asking why they feel so disconnected while doing everything right, then share this with them, not as advice, as a mirror. Subscribe if you want to keep walking deeper into the parts of the mind that most people avoid, because this is not the end. This is only the first door. What comes next will not make you comfortable. It will not give you answers, but it will bring you closer to something that most people never find. Not a conclusion, not a rule, not a cure, but clarity, the kind that does not vanish, the kind that does not pretend, the kind that stays. If you are still here, You already made a decision. Keep going. Someone out there is still hiding from the truth you just faced. Let this find them. Let them see. Let them choose.